I knew something was wrong with Troy, long before I knew something was wrong with me. And by the time I understood the difference, he'd already spent $32,000 in my name. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That part came later. Let me start with a Tuesday evening in October, the hum of the office AC, and a text message that landed in my chest the way his texts always did, like a small stone dropped from a height. Where are you? You said you'd be home by 6. No greeting, just those 7 words, and the familiar tightening in my stomach that I'd learned to breathe, through the way some people breathe through nausea. Functional, manageable, just something you dealt with. Still at the office, I typed back. I told you this morning, month-end close. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I'd gotten good at reading those dots. Long pause meant he'd been drinking. Short burst meant he was already past the point of reasoning with. When he called instead of texting, I knew to breathe before I answered. He called. You keep saying the office, he said when I picked up. Like that explains it. It does explain it. I'm at my desk. I'm finishing a reconciliation. I'll be home in an hour. Who else is still there? The question was designed to land where it did, and it did. No one. The building's basically empty. You sure about that? I closed my eyes briefly. Yes, Troy. He hung up. 3 years I'd worked at Mace Consulting Group, risk management, corporate logistics, private security contracting, and a few things I'd learned early not to ask too many questions about. 3 years of steady work, steady pay, and the slow, specific relief of being good at something after a few years of feeling like I was bad at everything. My boss, Killian Mace, was not what most people would call an easy man to work for. He was exacting and blunt, and there was a version of him that existed in that office, after hours, when the last support staff left, that was quieter and harder to read than his daytime self. He had dark eyes and a particular stillness that I'd spent approximately 3 years pretending not to notice. I was loyal to Troy. I had been loyal to Troy for 2 years, through the good months and the slow erosion of the bad ones, through the moment his charming attentiveness had begun to shade into something else, something that tracked my location and accounted for my time, and didn't like the way I smiled at colleagues or stayed late, or had lunches I hadn't cleared with him first. Still at it? I startled. Killian was in his office doorway in his end-of-day version, jacket off, sleeves rolled, the careful armor of the workday slightly relaxed. He looked at my phone, face down on the desk. Just finishing, I said. Go home, Remy. The clothes can wait until morning. I'm almost. Remy. He said my name with the same quality he brought to every decision. No softening, no decoration, but somehow never harsh. Go home. I gathered my things. He was already turning back to his office when he paused. My number still works after hours, you know that. He'd given it to me 14 months ago, a Friday night, when I'd gotten stuck in the parking garage elevator for 40 minutes with a dead phone signal. And the building's after-hours maintenance line, going straight to voicemail. He'd come down himself. On Monday, he'd arranged for the elevator to be serviced, and never mentioned the rest. I still had his contact saved, and occasionally, in the quiet of late evenings, I'd look at it and think about the expression on his face when the elevator doors had finally opened. Something between relief and a feeling I hadn't let myself name. Troy's car was in the driveway when I got home. He was at the kitchen table with his laptop and a glass that wasn't his first. He didn't look up. Dinner's in the fridge. Thank you. I set my bag down slowly, reading the room the way I'd become very practiced at reading rooms. The angle of his shoulders. How far the glass was down. The overhead light. He turned it off when he was building toward something, so the kitchen sat in the sallow light of the range hood. It was off. My sister called today, he said, still not looking at me. How is she? Fine. She wanted to know if we were coming to Thanksgiving. He clicked something on his laptop. I told her probably not. We already said we would. I told her probably not. He looked up then, and his eyes were very still. Because lately I don't know what we're doing 3 weeks from now. I don't know what we're doing tomorrow. Troy, I've been at work. You've been somewhere. He closed the laptop. I drove by the building this afternoon. My stomach dropped, not at the implication, at the fact of it. You drove by my office. I saw you at the window laughing. I was talking to a coworker about a spreadsheet error. That's not. You don't laugh like that with me anymore. His voice was very quiet. That was always the worst version. You used to. When did you stop? I opened my mouth and then closed it, because the answer was one I hadn't let myself say yet. He stood and I held my ground because I'd learned that moving backward only made things worse. He read retreat as confirmation of whatever he'd already decided. He stopped close enough that I could smell the bourbon and looked at me with that particular expression I'd never been able to name. Not quite anger. Something older than anger. I just want to know I can trust you, he said. You can trust me. I went through your phone while you were out. The floor felt different under my feet. You went through my. The passcode is your mother's birthday. I figured it out 6 months ago. He said it simply, like that was reasonable, like that was fine. There was nothing. I know there was nothing. But I need you to understand that I have to look, because something about the way you've been is making me feel like I'm losing my mind. The way I've been, I said, is at work. His hand closed around my wrist. Not hard enough to leave a mark immediately, just firm, deliberate, the grip of someone who wants you to understand where you stand. I tried to pull back and he tightened. Not cruelty. He'd learned to stay on the right side of cruelty. Just control. Just the reminder. I need you to let go of me, I said. I'm not hurting you. Let go of my wrist, Troy. He released me and stepped back, and we stood in the kitchen with the range hood light between us, both of us breathing. His expression had shifted into the wounded version. The one that came after, the one that made me feel like I was the thing that had happened to him. You should leave, I said. Tonight, I need you to go. This is my home, too. Then I'll go, but one of us is leaving this apartment right now. He grabbed his jacket and his keys like a man making a point, and he slammed the front door so hard the window over the sink rattled in its frame. I stood in the kitchen for a long time afterward. I thought about calling my sister in Phoenix. Thought about calling my friend Delia, who had been gently asking for a year whether I was doing okay. Thought about 911, and talked myself through why that felt impossible. No mark on my wrist yet. His father had served 12 years on the city council. I was already imagining the report I'd have to file, and the way it would be told back to me later as proof of my instability. Then I picked up my phone, and I opened my contacts, and I looked at Killian Mace's number for a long moment, and I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Remy. Just my name, and something in the careful way he said it, like he'd been half expecting this, like he was already paying attention, made my throat lock up. I'm sorry to call this late, I started. What happened? I stopped, tried again. I don't have anyone else to call right now, and I need someone to come. Can you come? I know that's a lot to ask. A beat of quiet address. I gave it to him. He said 15 minutes. He said to lock the deadbolt and the chain. He said to stay on the phone if I wanted to, and when I said I was okay, he said I'm already moving, and I heard his keys and his door and the city opening up behind him. He arrived in 12 minutes. He had a man named Beckett with him. Quiet, efficient, eyes that took in the street before anything else, who stayed near the car while Killian came to the door. I let him in. He stood in my entryway and looked at the room, and then at my wrist, which had started to purple slightly along the inner edge where Troy's fingers had been, and something moved through his expression that passed before I could fully read it. He's gone? He left, I told him to go. I wrapped my arms around myself. He might come back. Killian made a call I caught only in pieces, an address, a time, 2 hours at minimum, and then he looked at me again. You're not staying here tonight. I can't just. You can argue about it after you pack. I'll wait. I packed. His building was the kind that makes you feel like you've moved sideways into a different version of the city. A doorman who nodded without asking questions. An elevator that opened directly into the top floor. The apartment was clean lines and dark wood and windows that looked straight out over Lake Michigan, the water flat and black and scattered with the lights from the far shore. He showed me to a guest room with its own bathroom and towels that had never been used. You have the main code, he said, writing it on a notepad. Beckett's in the lobby. If you need anything in the night, knock or call. Either works. He paused at the door. You're not inconveniencing me. Don't let yourself think that. A doctor came. Dr. Pham, a composed woman who checked my wrist and asked careful questions without a trace of judgment. Soft tissue, nothing broken. Ice, then heat. She left me with something to help me sleep, and I stood in the bathroom of the guest suite afterward and looked at myself in the mirror for a while, trying to figure out when exactly I'd stopped being able to recognize the shape of my own days. I lay in the guest bed and listened to the muffled sounds of a city through thick glass and thought about how you stop seeing things, how you trade a little clarity for a little peace, and then trade a little more, and then one day you're standing in your kitchen with someone's hand around your wrist, and the question isn't what's happening, but how long has it been like this? I woke at 7 to 26 texts from Troy and a notification I hadn't noticed before. My Credit Karma score alert, which I'd turned off a year ago because the updates had made me anxious. It had fired overnight because my score had dropped 41 points. I sat up. My score had been 771 in January. I remembered because I'd been pleased about it. I'd spent 3 years carefully paying down student loans and building something solid. I was proud of 771. I opened the app. It was 589. I clicked through to the full report with the slow, floating feeling of someone who already knows and is just waiting for the words. 2 credit cards I'd never applied for, both maxed. A personal loan through an online lender, $14,000, 18.9% APR, 60 days past due. Another loan, $11,000, through a different lender, opened 7 months ago. A store card with a $4,300 balance at a home furnishings company I'd never set foot in. $32,400, accounts I'd never opened. Debt accumulating in my name while Troy slept in my bed and knew my SSN because we'd filed taxes together and laughed about it. I put the phone down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. I was still staring at it when Killian knocked. Coffee's on. I brought the phone with me to the kitchen and put it on the island without speaking. He looked at the screen and then at my face. He used my identity, I said, opened accounts in my name, took out loans. The flatness in my own voice surprised me. He wasn't just controlling me, he was systematically using me, the whole time. Killian sat down across from me. He didn't offer reassurance or outrage, both of which would have felt wrong. He just looked at me steadily, which was what I actually needed. I want to report it, I said. Everything. The financial fraud and what happened last night. And I want to do it myself, Killian. Not through you, not through anyone you call. Me. I need to be the one who walks in and gives that statement. I have a lawyer, he said, Nadia Flores. She does financial fraud and domestic cases exclusively. She'll prepare you and sit with you in the room, and nothing you say will get turned against you. That's not me taking over. That's a better weapon. I looked at him. Okay. Okay, he said, and poured me coffee. Nadia Flores was worth whatever she charged. She spent 2 hours with me before the police interview, going through every detail without judgment or hurry, and she sat across the table from the detective with me like she owned the room, which, in every way that mattered, she did. The detective's name was Reyes. He was methodical and careful, and he believed me. I could tell not because he said so, but because of the way he paused when I described the loan accounts, a particular alertness, a recognition. These patterns, he said, are consistent with financial exploitation cases. You're not the first person to describe this. Both comforting and devastating, as facts so often are. Troy called 51 times over the following week. He sent emails explaining that the loans were a misunderstanding, that he'd intended to pay them back before I noticed, that he'd been struggling with something, and I hadn't been present. He sent one that was just, "I love you," repeated until it filled the screen. I blocked his number, changed my banking passwords, froze my credit, filed fraud disputes with all 3 bureaus, called each lender directly, gave Nadia's contact information, documented every response. Killian's apartment had become a kind of neutral territory for me. I stayed in the guest room. We ate dinner together sometimes. We were careful with each other, in the way people are careful when there's something large in the room they've agreed not to address yet, Some evenings I worked at the kitchen island after he'd gone to bed, building my own case file out of bank records and screenshots, and a timeline I charted by hand on a legal pad. Because I needed my hands to be busies, and I needed the evidence to be something I understood completely. One evening he stood behind me and looked at the timeline for a moment. "This is solid work," he said. "It's self-preservation. That's how the best work happens." He was close enough that I could feel the quiet weight of his presence. "You have a systematic mind, Scout." The nickname came from nowhere and landed everywhere. I looked up at him. "Sorry," he said without looking sorry at all. "It fits." I turned back to my legal pad and felt the unfamiliar warmth of being seen accurately by someone who had no obligation to see me at all. The grand jury indicted Troy on 5 counts of identity theft and 3 counts of wire fraud. His bail was posted. He was ordered to stay 1,000 feet from me, my workplace, and any of my listed residences. A month later, the trial date was set. I moved into my own apartment on a Saturday in March. A 1-bedroom in Wicker Park, with original hardwood floors and windows that caught the afternoon light, the way I'd always wanted my windows to catch light, and a landlord who had replaced the locks before I moved in, because Nadia had called ahead. I bought a yellow armchair that Troy would have called impractical, and I put it by the biggest window, and I sat in it the first evening with a glass of wine, and felt, for the first time in longer than I could track, like I was inside my own life. Delia came over that weekend with her dog, and a box of stuff she'd been holding for me, since we'd had a conversation 2 months ago. That was the hardest conversation I'd ever had with anyone. She'd cried. I'd held it together through some kind of autopilot I didn't fully trust. We'd talked for 4 hours, and somewhere in the middle of it, she'd said I didn't want to push you, and I'd said I know, and we'd understood each other without needing to say the rest. "Tell me about the boss," she said now, sitting cross-legged on my new floor. "There's nothing to tell. You called him at 10 at night. He was the safest option." She gave me the look she'd been giving me since we were 22. The one that said, "I love you too much to call you a liar." The trial was in June. I was on the stand for almost an hour, and my hands were balled in my lap the whole time, but my voice didn't shake. Troy's attorney tried to establish that I'd authorized the accounts willingly and was now lying to escape debt I'd helped accumulate. I told the truth 3 times, each time in slightly different words, each time with the same specificity. Nadia said asked and answered twice, and both times the judge agreed. The jury came back in 6 hours, guilty on all counts. I walked out into the summer afternoon and stood on the courthouse steps and breathed. Not triumph, exactly. Something cleaner. Like a window that had been painted shut for years had finally been opened. Killian was on the sidewalk. He looked up when the doors opened, and when he saw my face, he didn't ask. I came down the steps and stopped in front of him and said, "Guilty on everything." He nodded and then quietly, "You did that." With significant help. No, he was looking at me directly. The help was structural. The fight was yours. I wanted to argue and couldn't, because he was right, and he knew I knew it. "I want to buy you dinner," I said, properly. I've been meaning to for months. Something shifted in his face, very small, very controlled, unmistakable. "You don't owe me anything." "I know I don't. I want to." He looked at me for a moment. "Then I'm not going to argue with you." We went somewhere in River North with cloth napkins and a wine list, and the kind of lighting that makes the world feel slightly apart from its ordinary self. We talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with lawyers or evidence, or the last 8 months. He told me about growing up between 2 cities, his mother's family in Cork, his father's in Chicago, belonging fully to neither, and making his own version of the space in between. I told him about dropping out of my MBA program 3 years into it, the year my mother got sick, how I'd never been sure if it was the right call, and had eventually decided it didn't matter. I couldn't undo it, so I'd better make it mean something. "I think that's the only way to handle most things," he said. Make them mean something. Decide they were the right call, then build until they were. We were walking back to my car when he slowed down. The street was quiet. We stopped. "I've been not saying something for a long time," he said, "because the reasons to not say it were right even when they were hard. He looked at me the way he had that night in the elevator, like he was relieved and hadn't planned on showing it. I'm not good at soft things. The world I work in. You know what it is. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. I've never pretended anything with you. I know. That's the point. His hand came up and very carefully tucked a strand of hair back from my face. I want you to keep standing in my life, Scout. That's what I'm trying to say. For as long as you're willing, I want you there. I'd spent 2 years making myself smaller, easier, less, taking up less space, wanting less clearly, apologizing for the wanting. Standing on a sidewalk at 10 o'clock with this man who had never once asked me to be less than I was. I'm not going anywhere, I said. He kissed me there in the street, steady and certain and careful in the way I'd started to understand was just who he was. Not cold, but deliberate. Not restrained, but honest. His hand was warm against the side of my face and I thought, with a clarity I didn't expect, this is what I was supposed to be waiting for. The months after that were not simple. Dating Killian meant accepting the parts of him that weren't simple. The late calls he stepped outside to take, the occasional Friday evening when Beckett appeared at my door before I'd been told anything was happening, the quiet way certain subjects were navigated around. One night he called from somewhere he didn't name and asked if I could stay in, and I said yes and didn't ask more than that. Not blind faith, eyes open faith. There was a difference and I was learning to hold it. But he never once asked where I was going, never checked my phone, never made me feel that choosing my own evening was an act of transgression. When Delia and I took a long weekend to Nashville, something I'd been wanting to do since before Troy and had never been allowed to do during, Killian said send me a picture of something beautiful and I did, and he texted back a single word, perfect. I was painting again. Watercolors, the way I'd loved them in college, before I'd decided loving things too openly made you vulnerable. I had a corner of my apartment dedicated to it now. Paper, brushes, a jar of water with a permanent pale blue tinge. Killian had seen a piece I'd hung in my kitchen, an abstract thing in gray and ochre that I'd done on a slow Sunday, and he'd stood in front of it for a long time. You could sell these, he said. I don't paint to sell. I know, that's why they're good. 8 months after the trial. On a Saturday morning with November light coming through the bay window and coffee going cold on the counter. He came into the living room while I was at my easel and stood behind me for a moment, looking at what I was working on. Can you put that down for a second? He said. Something in his voice made me set the brush down and turn around. He was holding a ring, simple band, 1 stone, deep blue, not ostentatious, just honest. The kind of thing you'd pick for someone who valued one true thing over several impressive ones. I hadn't told him that about myself. He'd simply known. I'm not good at speeches, he said. You're aware of this. You're better than you think. I want to build something with you. Properly, deliberately, knowing what we're both walking into. He was very steady, the way he was steady about everything that mattered to him. I want you to be mine, and I want to be yours, and I want us to handle whatever's hard together, instead of each carrying it alone. That's the speech. Killian. Marry me, Scout. Not a question exactly. A declaration in the shape of a question. The same way he did everything, with the full weight of his intention already behind it. Yes, I said, obviously yes. He slid the ring onto my finger and I looked at it for a moment. The blue of it catching the gray morning light, and felt something that I could only describe, then and now, as the opposite of shrinking, like I was exactly the right size, like I was taking up exactly the space I was supposed to. Troy was sentenced to 3 to 6 years. His parents' attorney sent a letter asking if I'd consider submitting a character statement on his behalf. Nadia replied on my behalf. I didn't ask what she wrote. What I thought about instead was a night 8 months before, sitting on my kitchen floor with my phone in my hand, trying to figure out who I could call. I'd run through the list, 911, my sister, my friend, anyone, and landed on a number I'd carried for over a year and never used. I used it. That's the part I think about, not the months of legal work, not the courtroom, not the sentencing. Just that I picked up the phone, that I said the words, I need someone to come, out loud into the dark, and let someone come. The rest of it, the ring, the apartment with the good light, The yellow armchair, the watercolors drying on Sunday mornings, the steadiness of a man who knew exactly what he was and loved me exactly as I was, all of that came because I picked up the phone. Because I decided I was worth the call. I think about that a lot, still. On ordinary Tuesday mornings when the light comes through the window and the coffee's on, and Killian's reading something at the kitchen island, with his sleeves rolled up and I'm at my easel with paint on my hands, and the whole thing is so quietly good, it sometimes catches me off guard. I think about how close I came to not making the call, and then I paint another stroke, and I don't think about it anymore. The life I have now is not despite what happened. It's because of what I chose to do with it.